These students are selected in nationwide competitions in their own countries, competitions held under the auspices of the Ministries of Education. They arrived during the Christmas holidays and will be in this country for 3 months, visiting as guests in the homes of 4 different American families and following what we hope will be a fairly normal program of school and community activities. The subject for this discussion is American influence abroad. But let me introduce you to the 4 participants. From the United Kingdom is Sara Chatt. Sara, where have you been staying?
Huntington, Long Island.
What's the most interesting thing that's happened to you in the past 2 weeks?
Well, I went to an extremely noisy basketball match on Friday.
Did you enjoy it?
Yes, I enjoyed
And
it.
your first one?
Pardon?
The first one you've been to?
Yes, it's the first one I've been to.
You'll be to many more during the next 2 months. Mr. Gopinath from India, we call him Gopi. Gopi, you're 17.
That's right.
Are you not? How are you getting on here?
Getting on very well, I think.
Where are you, Gopi?
In Bronxville, New York.
Bronxville, New York. What's the most interesting thing that's happened at school there?
I think the way the teachers and the students get along, I think is the most interesting thing I've noticed in the United States.
What do you mean by that exactly?
I mean the difference of approach between the relationship between the students and the pupils. I think it's very much less formal than we had back home.
How about you, Susan Rennie from South Africa? What have you been doing of interest?
Oh, lots of things. I went to a dance on Saturday night and I saw for the first time this thing they call the Lindy. It's
Can you do it?
not yet. I want to learn.
By the way, Susan, I was very interested in what you told me about the forum competition in South Africa this year. Every senior high school student
Has to participate.
has
Yes.
to participate, and you won.
Yes.
Congratulations. From Lebanon is Ziyad Husami. What have you been doing of interest, Ziyad?
Well, a lot of things really. Attending 2 classes, one which is a problem to me called the Word Problems class, and, and another called the American History. We are studying the American Constitution. Well, the most interesting event was a dance last Saturday. I was taught how to jitterbug. I think it's the most informal dance in the world.
Now, to get back to the subject of discussion today, Sara, you started out by saying that American influence in your country you thought was 99.9% bad. Would you explain why?
Yes, well, it's a lot to say, so perhaps if I took one topic and then let the others expand on it. I'd like to take the topic of films, particularly. I feel the American gangster film is appalling. We have this trouble in Britain in the Soho gang warfare, and I feel it's a direct influence of American gangster films which is making these youths want to cut each other to pieces like this. And another thing of these American films which I really do deplore is the war films, where they have to have somebody who is bad, and where they have to take some race to be bad, either Japanese or German or Italian, and subconsciously one immediately thinks all Japanese are bad, all Italians are bad, and that's one way of making prejudice, which I deplore. That's part of the 99.9%.
I think you are radical in that. Movies all over the world have been trying to photograph most of the aspects of the human soul. In this soul, you have the good and the bad. Now, if the American movie is stressing the bad thing, I think this can be a moral lesson to the spectator, where you can see the tragic end of the evil doer, of the one who commits a crime. You can see, for example, that he is sentenced to death or
Yes,
something
but they
of the
don't
kind.
stress that.
And you can beware it. They surely do in most of the films.
Well, I'd like to say we have a terrific amount of primitive or more or less uneducated people in South Africa, and they're very easily misled. And it's been proved that American gangster films do influence them. In our urban areas, the crime rate is rising rapidly, and these are because they show these films, and they're very much in demand. These people flock to see these films. And I know for a fact, it was in our press a couple of weeks ago, they showed a film in one of these movie houses, and Richard Woodmark appeared in it wearing a slouch hat and one of these GI types of raincoats. And within 2 weeks, every clothes dealer in Johannesburg had sold out of those type of clothes. And there were plenty more on order, which shows that they want to imitate these people. And I don't think that it teaches them a lesson. I think that they are more or less many of these people have a low mentality, and they want to emulate these people. And these crime films glamorize crime. They make it look great and wonderful.
They glamorize it to the one who is mentally weak. But if you are mentally strong, you can have a lesson from it.
Yes,
I mean,
but it's
very beneficial.
people. It's the mentally weak people, isn't it, who go and see these sorts of
Well, then
films.
it's not the mistake of the American movie. It's the mistake of your people.
Well, would you say then that having this racial background is introducing prejudice, where you have to have somebody bad, and where you're basing it on history?
Well, war itself is bad.
Yes.
And these movies are trying to picture these inhuman actions taken in war.
But do you feel, after you've seen a war film, when you come out, do you instinctively say, hate the person who's been bad, hate the person who's been inflicting such awful cruelty?
No, this is just a movie.
Oh.
I know, but most people don't react that way. You're perhaps one of these mentally strong people.
Thank you.
But
I think I am.
but the average person, I should say, is very prone to be influenced by these films.
Well, what
The
about
average
films?
person.
That wouldn't make up the whole 99.9% of your disapprobation of American influence, Sarah. What else?
No, well, another point which I'd like to make is the advertising. I dislike intensely, especially since I've been to America, these jingly rhymes, the way you say your news together with advertising of a certain brand of toothpaste. I can't see what any connection there is. And I feel you're getting a uniformity through the world. Wherever American influence is penetrating, you're getting this certain sort of advertising. And it's making people accept things without really thinking about them. If you're given these special little rhymes, these special little songs, all jingly up, and you remember them, and you don't think about them.
Well, in South Africa, I think that American advertising has had a good influence to a certain extent, because I know the local magazines and papers are very drab and dull, or have been. And since the sort of a glossy American magazines have come in, there has been an attempt to raise the standard of the South African magazines. And also, I think the advertisements have increased, and this helps the economy of the country, really.
But do you think this increase in the economy of the country is worth the sacrifice of individualism? I mean, you have a sort of uniformity. You think this economic advantage you gain from American advertising would offset this loss in individual thought?
That's hard to say, but I don't really think that so much individuality is lost.
We're talking about
Really?
different types of advertising. You're talking about advertising in books. I'm talking about advertising on the radio, on television, on films. That's what I consider as bad. I
What's
don't
the
dis-
common denominator of all these?
Yes, well, that will go into my 1% of good American influence.
By the way,
That's
Sarah,
in the magazine.
since England has commercial broadcasting as well as BBC broadcasting, are your commercial broadcasters using our type of advertisement?
Yes, they are.
Well, that goes into, from your point of view, the 99%, does it?
Yes.
Do you listen more to the BBC or to the commercial broadcast?
Much more to the BBC broadcast. That's me personally.
Well, now we've covered films and advertising. Any other American influences in your countries? We'll take the bad first. Any others that are part of what you deplore?
Comics.
Comics?
Oh, yes. I think they have even a worse influence than films, because they're easily accessible. I mean, most people can afford comics, and you don't have to be very intelligent or even educated to read them. I mean, they have the story, and I think most of them are sexy, sadistic, and well, shocking generally. And I feel that they're even raising the standard of literature. Well, you can't even call comics literature. And also, they're having a very bad effect on language. They use guys, I want to pump you full of lead, and these sort of things. And
Ziyad, could I ask you how much influence you have in the Lebanon of comics and films?
Well, really, we do not have much comics in Lebanon.
No.
We aren't interested in that type of thing. But we have some magazines like True Love Stories and this type, which gives awfully bad influence.
Yes, very bad.
It shows the
impression.
American to be that sexually very immoral.
What about in India?
Well, you have very little of influence through films. Films you do, but it's, I think, more sort of imitation and does not bring out any of the gangsterism, only a sort of cheap vulgarity. And I don't think it has any of the evil effects noticed in South Africa or perhaps in Britain.
I think that in Britain and South Africa we do have this amount of influence, because having rather a high dollar reserve, we are able to import these products in large quantities and things.
So, could I ask you a question completely disjointed from this? You said earlier that everybody in high school was compelled to write this essay to get it. Did that include the coloured population in South Africa?
No.
Only the
It
white
didn't.
population?
Well, there isn't even a high enough percentage of Negro coloured students. They don't think they'd be representative enough.
Because they're not educated enough?
No, they have the education
They are not
facilities.
given the chance to be educated.
Oh, yes,
I
they are.
wondering how-
Oh, yes, they are.
Well, if
As a
they
matter-
are, why don't
They
you...
get free high school education from the very beginning, from kindergarten to the end of their university career. But most of them, because of economic or background, most families that have 9 or 10 children, they have to, their parents practically force them to leave schools when they're, what we call standard 6, I think it's about the 7th grade, and they have to go out to help support the family income. And I think you'll have that in the lower income brackets in England as well. And that's why there's so few in the high schools.
What's the literacy rate in South
At
Africa?
the present, in 1956, the end of 1956,
Of the
there were
coloured.
33% of the coloureds, which if you consider that they've only had education barely for 2 generations, most of them only 1 generation, is a very high percentage.
Yes. Okay.
Well, I think now I'd like to tell you something about the educational influence in Lebanon. In Beirut, we have the American University, which was founded in 1866. This university has about 3,500 students belonging to 51 nationalities from all over the Middle East. Now, through this university, we came to know the Atlantic Charter, the Declaration of Independence, the human rights. Through this university, we came to understand liberty and democracy and to live it on the campus as well as in our political life. Most of the politicians of the Arab world, and especially Lebanon, have had their education at this university. 2 of our political movements in the Arab world, the National Syrian Party and the Arab Nationalists, have originated from the American University itself. And I think they have very good influence over the country.
Was it, Ziyad, excuse me, was it the first American university established in the Middle Eastern area?
Yes, it was.
And
the
how long
first.
ago, you say?
1864. Well, up from 1864 to 1920, it was called the Syrian Protestant College. Then in 1920, it became the American University of Beirut. It is operated by an American president and run by a board of American trustees in New York. We have...
Ziyad, deviating from that education, tell me, how has American foreign policy, what is the attitude of Lebanon at the moment to American foreign policy? I mean, you have, America didn't support Britain and France during the Suez dispute. What
That's
was
true.
Lebanon's attitude towards America because of that?
Well, Lebanon's attitude and the Arab world attitude was a good one, and they liked that attitude of the United States. We can summarize this by saying that the United States had once more stood by its principles, and it wasn't easy going with the imperialist ambitions of its allies.
And what about now that the Eisenhower Doctrine's been published, or I should say,
Well, I
brought out?
think it won't be very much successful because the American policy has been always trying to look at us as people who have a strategic place and 60% of the reserve oil of the world, not as people who have the right and good living. They were just taking us as wealth or as land only. They didn't take any care of our psychology, and I think if the Ike's doctrine is well presented, that it will be surely accepted, because we in the East hate communism, From a religious point of view, we are Christians or Muslims, and communism is a totally different religion. We do not want it, but we have been pushed into the Russian influence by the West.
Don't you think that the majority of Americans understand the Arabs' point of view?
No, I don't think so.
And
why?
tell me, in your schools, is learning about the American heritage compulsory?
No, it is not.
You can take
we
that
study
if you-
about our heritage before,
And you can take the American heritage only if you wish to?
if you wish to.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
you seem to be full of praise for the American system of
Not
education.
full of praise, it's a mere
Well,
point
I
of
mean-
gratitude,
Well, yes,
and you have to mention the good and the bad.
that is true. Well, do you think that would be in keeping with your sympathies with the Arab world, since American influence is operating through Israel? Could you possibly have a harmony between the two, your loyalty to American ways of
Not
doing
loyalty,
it?
you can't say loyalty,
It's
friendship.
You think it's friendship?
Yeah. And I think that every problem has its resolution. If America really wants to solve it, it can solve it. It created the problem.
Sarah, having been in England for a week now, in America, how does American education compare with British education? Do you think that British education is better?
Well, I can't really speak generally on this topic. I think I've been in a particularly good school where I have been. I have been impressed by the courtesy. I have been impressed by the easy friendship between the students and the masters, which has not resulted in any sort of hooliganism. And it's the same in my school in Britain. But if I'm to speak generally for Britain, the public schools, of course, are entirely different. They are our private schools. There you have a very strict discipline between master and pupil, and also in some grammar schools. But from the actual school that I have come from, I find very little difference from the American school.
But you said to me that the American system of comprehensive education promotes undesirable snobbery,
Yes.
and that there is a lack of intimacy,
Yes.
and that there is, well, generally it's undesirable, this comprehensive. Well, a team of educationists have just come back from America, come back to South Africa, and they have been making extensive, I should say, they've made an extensive report on comprehensive education. And as you know, our system of education at the moment in South Africa is based entirely on the British system.
Yes.
But they've decided to introduce from this year onwards a comprehensive system of education because they feel that it's much better. And as a matter of fact, our school was an experiment. They tried this out. And I can assure you that there's no snobbery between the different groups, and there's perfect intimacy. There are only 480 of us in the school, and the head has contact with all his pupils as well as the
that's not
teacher.
quite the same. I was talking about schools that had 1,300 people in. That is a prejudice, I would say, in Britain. We are only just beginning to experiment. And I've only been in American schools, 3 days, so I cannot form a judgment upon how well everybody knows each other.
Susan, to clarify, by comprehensive education, you mean one school to which everybody goes, people who
Yes.
want to follow an academic course as well as people who
Trade.
want to take shop and commercial subjects and so on. Sorry for intervening.
Yes, they
I just
don't
wanted
have
to
to
clarify
go
that.
to trade schools. And, I mean, it's like in England they have just pure grammar schools and trade schools. But in South Africa from now on, if they want, we have that at the moment, but they want to combine it all into one school, as in America.
What's it like in India? Could we have that?
Well, I
don't
think
know.
we are modeled very much on your lines, as a matter of fact, and we have very strict discipline in our schools, very much unlike the American system of education. But I wouldn't know, I don't think that the American system of education has got anything inherently wrong with it. I think there is courtesy. I mean, if you, by courtesy you mean wishing and bowing, and those are all the external
Yes.
prerequisites of it. And I think I have found courtesy wherever I went in American institutions, perhaps not in standing up when the teacher came in and all that, but in its deeper things, I think courtesy is not lacking at all in America.
I think one of the traits of the American educational system is that it prepares you for life as well as for a higher education
Yes.
in college.
Well, you get that in Britain in the secondary schools, the ones which deal with the people who aren't quite so bright. But they do want to deal with those who are academically well advanced. They don't want to drag those people back.
Well, I think they have to follow this system in the States because they have such a vast number of population and they need mass education.
And they want to
I
cater
think
for the average person, and there's so many average persons.
Gopi, get back onto our American influence in other countries. Would you say there was any resentment in India against American aid? Do you feel that they're giving it as help and making too much of a song and dance about it? Perhaps a no-interest aid or loan for 50 years, and then at the end of the 50 years they forgot about making you pay back the loan might be better.
I think that would be better.
Yeah.
But I don't think there is any resentment or any, at present, I don't think there's any feeling that there is any underhand play behind the whole thing. I think it's just an attitude of friendship and not of charity, which is a good thing. You know,
Sara, is it that you hate the American influence because it is trying to put an end to your influence in your colonies? I mean, you have a kind of complice, the British and the French, that America is trying now to put an end to your influence in your colonies and to replace you. And I think this is one of the major factors that is making Britain hate the American influence. Is that right?
No, I disagree with you. I do say that Britain at the moment is feeling particularly insecure. But about this American influence in our country, we are an old tradition. We have a lot behind us. And to have this comparatively young nation bringing in these pop singers, which people loathe. They dislike them intensely, but they're influencing our youth.
But how do they come in if they dislike them intensely?
Well, the older generation, should I say, and the grammar schools mostly of the present generation. But they're altering our way of life, and we dislike it. We don't want to become dressed like the Americans. We don't want to have these crew cuts.
But the younger generation do, and they're the people
yes,
who matter.
Yes,
Well.
and we think that's bad for England.
Oh, you see.
We're talking about music.
I'm speaking personally about that. Sorry, Susan, go on.
American music has had such an influence on South Africa that nowadays you wouldn't think that popular jazz music and that had originated in America. We just take it for granted. It's sort of invaded South Africa completely and ousted classical music. Well, not completely, but you could say 90%, and even our own traditional folk songs. And we have these pop records and hit parades, things like that, and they're quite accepted.
What is the influence of these jazz records on the coloured population?
Oh, well, I'd like to say, I think that most coloured people have got a rhythm. I mean, I think jazz in America, I don't know if this is correct, originated from the coloured people, and most of the jazz artists are coloured people, and it's really made a great impression on the coloured people in South Africa, and they're making great headway, and we have some very good artists coming up, jazz artists, coloured artists that is, and they're being encouraged a great deal.
And talking about your coloured problem again, does the Supreme Court decision have any influence in South Africa?
Well, that's quite a hard question, but actually it does have quite, I should say Parliament isn't a sovereign. The Supreme Court has a large amount of influence. Well, it is the supreme authority in the land, as it is laid down in the Constitution.
Susan, excuse me, do your papers report quite a lot about what happens in race relations in the United States, your papers in South Africa?
Well, recently they have been doing so. I think they put the spotlight on all the incidents that occur in the United States. There was a certain trial just recently involving a Negro boy who'd been murdered, and the white jury would not convict the men who'd been brought up for the murder, and also this desegregation in the schools, having the coloured students having to be guarded, going to schools and bringing out the National Guard. They're playing that up quite a good deal in South Africa. And at least in South Africa, justice is completely impartial. If a jury will never, the prisoner, or they usually have an assessor, but even a white jury would never, or they could never, it's just in our tradition, so blatantly go against you should say just the judge and the court itself.
We do have this propaganda against the states in Lebanon. It's used by communists, and they present in the papers pictures which show segregation and certain stories about it. And under this they write, for example, the United States is the land of false liberties, or see, this is the land of democracy, and for example, they would say the story of the girl who was prevented from entering college because she was colored.
Actually, I think America speaks so much about democracy without ever really knowing what they mean about democracy.
Well,
I agree
I
with
think you two Americans and British fight about it.
Yes, we do.
Well, what I believe is that the parliamentary system has originated in England, and the British have paid a high price for it. I mean, they had to fight their kings and put an end to the idea of divine rights. That's true. We mustn't deny this for you. But still, the truth remains that America now is the pattern of democracy in the world. I mean, because England is still having imperialist ambitions in the world, while the States is not. That's what makes the whole world believe.
I think so. That's a very important thing. And I don't think you have a monopoly, so to say, of democracy. While it might have started with you, but I think America has taken it and enriched it considerably. And of course, this is this question of imperialism, which I think you would find very hard to resolve with your concepts of democracy. How exactly would you fit it in?
First of all, we're no longer an imperialistic nation. We are now a commonwealth, which is entirely different.
No,
yes,
it's not different. It's a different name.
No, a commonwealth is the free association of nations. They join if they wish to, and they don't if they don't wish to. Like Australia is one, New Zealand. They have completely their own affairs in their own hands, their own foreign policy. They can join a war if they want to and if they don't want to. in our colonies, which are part of our empire, we
Empire.
are, yes,
So you are
yes, we still
imperialist.
have our empire, but we're no longer increasing it, you
But
see.
you're trying to keep
decreasing it.
you're trying to keep hold of what you have.
No,
Gopi,
look.
Gopi.
No, let me say this. In the Gold Coast, in 12 months, they are going to become Ghana. In Malaya, in 12 months, they are going to have complete freedom. Take India, you took your independence, became a republic quite easily. You are now a member of the Commonwealth, although you are a republic, and although you do not recognize our queen, but only accept her as a symbol.
Cyprus.
Cyprus,
They
we
don't
are
have to
having trouble
recognize
in.
her.
But we
They
have...
are granting a
But there the
constitution.
church is
You
in
haven't
trouble.
given the independence to any people unless they have revolted against you. Now you have to give
no.
Cyprus
I-
freedom
Did you
because-
revolt against us?
Oh, most definitely
sure.
did.
What did
in
Gandhi
our own
do?
way we did.
In your own way, but
Yes.
it's not a bloody revolution
It
like...
doesn't need to be bloody.
Yes, but we have to wait till the people
But
are
they have
ready to
shown to
rule
the world.
themselves.
They have
well,
shown
What
to the
was
world.
time?
They have shown to the world that they disagree with you.
I'm sorry. Our time, we'll have to carry this on in another program. Thank you, Sara Chatt, Mr. Gopinath from India, Susan Rennie from South Africa, and Ziyad Husami. I'm so sorry I had to interrupt you. Next week, we'll be talking about American teenagers and teenagers around the world. Are they misunderstood?